listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Motherhood Experience. What a treat you are in for today. Before I get started talking about it, raving about it, I want to invite you to follow me over on Instagram at _ the Motherhood Experience. Follow me on the new-ish Facebook page that my husband so graciously has agreed to carry on his account. I'll link it in the show notes below. Leave us a review. Leave us a comment, a thumbs up every time you interact with us, whether it's just a thumbs up, especially if it's a share. Any of those things help us tremendously, and I thank you in advance for doing that. Today, I had the pleasure of having a conversation with my husband's cousin's wife. Did you follow that family tree line there? Rachel and I met, I don't remember when, honestly, but she's married to a family member. Her husband actually lived with us during college for a semester, and the day after he moved in with us is the day I found out that I was pregnant with our first child, Haley. So things were, it's probably not his favorite time ever living with us during that semester when I was pregnant and sick and irritable and all the things. So, Travis, we love you so much if you ever listen to this. And Rachel, love her so much. I knew she would have a phenomenal story. I could have talked to her for so much longer than I actually did. We have a great conversation. I want to get right into it. So here's my conversation with her. Welcome back to the Motherhood Experience podcast, where I am joined by my guest and cousin-in-law, Rachel Kleppen. It's so good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well today. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You have a very unique story how you entered into motherhood, and I would love to get into that. Let's start with ages of kids and the stage of motherhood you're in.
Okay, I have 3 kids. I've got a 6-year-old boy named Benaiah. I've got a 4-year-old boy named Caleb, and then I've got a 1-year-old little girl named Penny. So I am in the thick of the littles, I guess you could say.
They're crazy years, but fun years. And I guess we could say that for every stage, honestly.
Right.
Probably even our parents would say the same about us.
Yeah.
So you are married to my husband's cousin. And when you and Travis were first married, planning a family, all of that, or I guess when you were first married, how did it come about that you started talking about a family, planning a family? What did that look like for the two of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting. For my own part, I think prior to meeting Travis, I've just always been someone who's been open to whatever path God had for me, which has always turned out to be different and wilder than I expected for myself. And I think for me, having a family wasn't necessarily a huge priority for me, or it wasn't, I was content to be just a crazy single woman running around the world and telling people about God. Like, that was kind of more what I envisioned for my life. And then I met Travis, and just quick background on him. He had done some missions training in Taiwan for 2 years, and then he wanted to move back there permanently, but he had some student loans and they encouraged him to move home for a year and get those sorted out and paid off before coming back full time. So that's when I met him, actually, was when he moved back to pay off his student loans. And I think I think one of the probably most vivid memories I have of dating him was he was getting ready to move back to Taiwan. We hadn't quite sorted out if we were going to get married yet, if we were sure this was it. And he brought me to this going away party with most of his extended family. And he just like disappeared after the first 20 minutes, and I'm like fending for myself with all these like relatives I don't know. And I'm just like, where did he go? And so anyway, finally I end up in the backyard, and there's this like giant scrum of children playing and laughing and giggling, and he's like laying at the bottom of the pile, and he's just someone who loves kids so much. And he's always, I mean, every event to this day we go to, he sits at the kids table. He's just a huge kid guy. So I think, yeah. And then we decided to get married, and I think, I just think I felt, yeah, really comfortable having kids because I'm the youngest child in my family. I have three older sisters, and I just didn't have that like I love little kids sort of thing because I just didn't have little kids around me when I was growing up. And so I think I've always felt a little insecure. I wasn't a good babysitter, never wanted to babysit people's kids. And so I think just having that confidence in like that he has such a gifting with little kids, I think, yeah, just brought a lot of peace to that decision. So yeah, and to get into the story of how we decided to have kids, it was just I don't know if it was a happy accident. I still don't fully understand, but it's kind of funny because we got married, and just with the way the visa worked out, I wasn't able to get onto his insurance for almost a year after I moved to Taiwan with him. And we just surprisingly got pregnant, like, yeah, what would it be, 10 months before I qualified for insurance. And so we're such practical people with money, and we're like, oh no. And anyway, it's a really long, cool story of God's provision. But it wasn't like, oh, we should have a family. It was just like, actually, I'm going to tell this story because this is funny. I was telling someone this the other day. I have some like health issues with my thyroid. I had thyroid cancer back in 2015, and I have to take these meds every day. Well, anyway, when I went over to Taiwan, I had a hard time getting my prescription switched over. And so while I was waiting to get more medication sent from the States, I was having to ration my pills anyway. And I was extremely tired and having these mood swings and just really struggling. And I had a friend come over to pray for me, and we're praying, and she's like, Rachel, I think this is from the Lord. I think you're pregnant. And I was like, there's no way that I could be pregnant. That I can't think of how that would have happened. And she was like, well, I'm going to go buy you a pregnancy test or just leave it here. You guys can do with it what you want. And so anyway, Travis gets home that night, and I'm like, I don't know, our friend thinks I might be pregnant, but I don't know. And he's like, well, just take the test. Well, so I take this test, and we live in Taiwan, so all of the instructions are in Chinese. So we take this test, and we're like looking at it, and these lines come up on there, and we're trying to read the instructions, but we can't understand what the instructions say. So for like, honestly, 10 minutes, we're sitting there trying to like translate. We're taking this little scanner thing, can't figure it out. So what we had to do is we had to take like this app and like type the character out that was on the test, and then all of a sudden it like pops up like pregnant. And so we were like, oh my goodness. So I was just super overwhelmed because it was not anything I was prepared for. I think we were planning on waiting a while to have kids, and then the baby was on their way, and they were growing. So it was kind of a fun, crazy change of events.
I want to talk about that a little bit because you are half the world away. You find out after 10 minutes of trying to decipher a foreign language that you are in fact pregnant. What was it like being pregnant with no family nearby and really no familiarity of food, of culture, of healthcare? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We lived on a training base in Taiwan that was very diverse. I think, at one point we had people from 17 different countries that we were working alongside, and we had some American families. And so I had friends that had babies there recently, and, they didn't seem to be too, or it seemed to be a fine experience for them. So that wasn't so much of a fear for me. I think what hit me was that summer my dad had flown two of my sisters out with himself to visit us. And this is before I knew we were pregnant. They had booked the tickets. And so they came, and, we knew that by that point. We told them. And I think when it really hit me was when they were going to leave. We were standing in the street, and they were going to hop in a taxi, go to the airport. And it's like, and as that taxi with my sisters drove away, I think it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was just sobbing in the middle of the street because I'm just like, wow, there goes my family. And I think I did feel truly alone in that moment. Not that I didn't have friends that I thought could help me, but there is just a difference of, it hit me like I'm going to have this baby without my family. I'm going to raise this baby without my family. But I think what was really cool in that moment is there was another woman from our base who happened to be standing on the sidewalk, and she just saw, I think I almost like just fell to the ground because I was crying, and she just came and gave me a huge hug, and she just said, what, I did this and it's hard, but I'm going to walk with you through this. And she really did. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her later when I share about the birth, because she had a cool role to play in that.
Yeah.
So I think initially it was hard to accept. What's really cool is for our wedding, we'd only been married for like 5 months by that point, but my mom had a friend who just, I don't know, she just prayed about it and felt like instead of giving us a wedding gift, she wanted to at some point buy my mom a plane ticket to come see us. And so my mom was able to come for a month after my son was born. And so that was so special and really good to have her there. So.
And especially for your recovery, because why don't you kind of talk about what happened? Like you got sick. Like I know what happened, but I'm trying not to give it away right now.
That's okay.
So you got sick, went in to deliver. Tell us about that whole experience. And you're still in Taiwan when you deliver him.
Yep. So yeah, my son Ben was due on December 9th, and I should say I am just the absolute worst when it comes to healthcare. I am like the opposite of a hypochondriac. Like I'm someone who needs to be more concerned. And it's so good that I'm married to Travis, because he's just always like, their temperature's 99 degrees. Do we need to go to the hospital? Sort of thing. And I'm just like the total opposite. Like they're always going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And so anyway, I had a doctor over there who a couple of my friends had recommended because her English was really good. And she was great. The care over there was really good. She knew I didn't have insurance, which Travis and I are just so practical with money. And we're like, oh man, like the difference between, the insurance over there is so good. I'll tell you, my son, Caleb, my second son was born over there, and his whole birth cost $150 US dollars. It's just ridiculous. And I'll get into how much Ben ended up costing. But so I think she was really gracious with that. So, I had like high blood pressure throughout my pregnancy, but again, I'm just like, unless the doctor tells me like you're in huge trouble, I just didn't really think much of it. I would say probably towards the end of the second trimester, I just like got these massive clown feet. Like, my feet were humongous. And I had like, and it's funny, like Taiwanese people have small feet, so I couldn't like buy shoes that fit.
It's funny to hear me, it's funny for me to hear you describe them like that. Because the same thing happened to me first pregnancy, but
yeah.
It's not funny. It's like a really serious thing, right. But to hear them called clown feet just really cracked me up.
No, they were. They were just, and I kind of have like bigger feet in general, and they were absolutely huge, and so I just like did everything I could to kind of get the swelling down. And I think too, one of the harder things about having a baby overseas, and I realized this because I had my third child here, is there's an element of you have to advocate for yourself. You have to say, this is an issue I'm having, and they can work with you on that. And it's hard. Like, I speak some Chinese, but as far as like talking about my liver and my swollen feet and all these things, like I don't have that kind of language. And so I think because I wasn't bringing these things to the doctor, she wasn't necessarily bringing them up either. And I think there was concern that maybe I had preeclampsia, but it's like, I think in order to do, I think it is still to this day, I don't fully understand it all, but it's like, you take that urine test, and I think it's something that shows up on there that really is like, wow, she has preeclampsia. And up until like 35 weeks, I didn't have anything show up for that. So I don't know, I just figured I had big feet and high blood pressure. And I didn't know any better because I'd never been pregnant before. And so at about, I want to say, it was like 36 weeks. My husband was doing this teaching. He taught in a Bible school, and it was his turn to teach. And I really wanted to go. I was pretty pregnant, but I wanted to go hear him teach. And it was like the night before, I just started vomiting, and I was so ill, like literally. I don't know if I've ever felt so sick in my life. And just repenting of everything I'd eaten, and it was just awful. And then I was starting to have trouble breathing, and I just thought like, and man, I just have really bad heartburn. And so I went to a clinic the next morning and just told them I had heartburn because that's what I thought was wrong with me. So they gave me, and again, I think Taiwanese like healthcare professionals are very good at their jobs, but I do think they probably felt intimidated by this tall pregnant white woman of just like, okay, she said she had heartburn, so we'll just give her heartburn medication. So then I'm walking home, and I just like am like so out of breath. And I get home, and I had a like phone date scheduled with a friend of mine who's a nurse just randomly. And as I'm like talking to her, I can like hardly catch my breath. And she's like, "You need to go to the hospital. Like, I don't think you're well." And I'm like, okay. So Travis gets home, and we go. And again, it's just a weird thing because like here I had my doctor's phone number. I could call her nurse. I could get in touch with her. I didn't have any of that. And my doctor didn't have office hours that day. So I just went to just signed up for an appointment with a different doctor who didn't know anything about me. And they bring me in, do some tests. They send me to have like that thing where they monitor the baby's heart. They strap it around you, and they just couldn't quite get a handle what was going on. And I'm so careful the way I tell this story because I take as much blame as them. I don't think they were being negligent. I just think there were a lot of factors. But they told me that I could go home, and they're like, and if the baby stops moving, then come back. Well, that's like the most terrifying thing to hear because it's not like your baby's constantly moving, right? And so I went home and told Travis, I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. And then, without getting too graphic, like my urine was just like almost brown. It looked like a dark apple cider kind of. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel right. And what I didn't realize at the time is like my body was just like completely shutting down. And so, by God's providence, before I had moved to Taiwan, I had nannied for an OBGYN. I just slept overnight at her house with her kids when she was on call. And so I had her phone number. I just texted her a picture of my urine. I'm like, I think something's wrong, and I don't know what's up. And she saw it, and I think it was the middle of the night, and she was like, you need to go to the emergency room immediately. And I think that's when I first like realized this is a really dangerous situation. And so we get to the hospital, and they take a blood test, and they realize like, and again, I probably should research more of this, but essentially like they diagnosed me with HELP syndrome, which from what I understand is like a phase beyond preeclampsia, like really, really serious. And at this point, Ben and I are both in like serious danger of not making it. And they wanted to do an emergency C-section, but my platelet levels were like had plummeted. They were so low that they were afraid if they cut me open that I'd bleed to death. And so they're giving me all these like platelets transfusions. We're sitting there for hours, like waiting to be ready. And, we've got people praying for us. And oh, my poor mother. Wow. Just being an ocean away and knowing there's a really serious situation, and all you can really do is pray. And so finally they feel like they're ready to wheel me into surgery. And I don't know, I don't know how to describe myself other than I'm a very practical person. And I just knew as they were taking me to anesthesia, I'm just like, I'm either going to wake up here or I'm going to wake up in heaven. And there's literally nothing I can do at this very moment to change that. So I'm just going to trust in the Lord for my life. But then I think there was also just an awareness of like, you know what? Ben's days were numbered, from the beginning, from long ago, I should say. And if he's not going to make it out of this hospital, then, God numbered his days. And so I think I had a peace about that. And so they wheel me in to put me under for the surgery. And poor Travis is alone in this waiting room. It's the middle of the night, and they hand him this clipboard. They're like, we need you to sign this because she might not survive this surgery. And so my poor husband just signs this form and then is alone in this room by himself waiting. And but I think he would say like the Lord really met him in that place. And I think what's cool too is just with the time difference, like it was during Sunday morning church in America, and our church like stopped and prayed for us at the literal exact time I was being wheeled into that surgery, which is just really special. And so I woke up a couple hours later in a different space, which I later found out was the ICU. And I didn't have a cell phone. And so I am like laying there, people are attending to me, my womb is empty. And so I just like asked this nurse in Chinese, like, is my baby alive? And she looked at me, she said, yeah, he's okay. And so I think that was really cool to know that, yeah, at that point he had survived the surgery. He was upstairs, but it was 5 in the morning at this point, and they only had 2 visiting hours in the ICU a day, and one was at 11 a.m. and I think one was at like 8 p.m. So I had 6 hours to wait for any news or anything from Travis. I didn't have a cell phone or anything like that. They kept telling me to sleep, and then they would like check my blood pressure every 15 minutes, and so I don't know, that was a long time waiting. But anyway,
I,
the my doctor who I was talking about, she it was hilarious. She at like 4 p.m. because I think they realized I was stable enough like around noon or 1 to be moved out of the ICU, but they didn't have any beds upstairs available. And it was so funny, like she at 4 p.m. like stormed to the ICU, like yelling at all these nurses, like, she doesn't have insurance. Get her out of here. She doesn't have insurance. Like, this is such a big deal. Like, she's paying for this. And what's funny is, like, ICU in Taiwan is maybe $100 a day. So it's not like this huge thing. But in her mind, like, we need to protect her because this is expensive. And so eventually I get moved upstairs. And man, this is such a long story. Thank you for listening to this. But and in Taiwanese culture, I think they do a lot of things really well when it comes to taking care of the mother after birth, and in a lot of ways better than we do here in the States. They just really value the recovery and the rest of the mother. But I think sometimes it comes at the expense of the relationship with the baby. Like, and so at this point, I mean, Ben's been out of the womb for almost 24 hours. I still haven't met him. And so they get me moved up and to my room, and I was like, oh, okay, can I meet the baby now? And they're like, well, no, he's in the nursery. And they had just kind of had like him in one of those cribs that had oxygen. And they're like, we want to keep him in the nursery. And Travis was frustrated because he was like, I held him for 30 minutes outside that. It was more just a precaution. It wasn't, it wasn't a life or death sort of thing. And so they were like, you can meet him tomorrow, and I'm just like, wow, I don't want to wait till tomorrow. I wanted to nurse him, all these things. And so anyway, my friend Anna, the one who I talked about giving me a hug in the street, had come to visit us, and her Chinese is a lot better than mine. And she was just determined that she was not going to take no for an answer. And I mean, she got no 5 different times because there's a hierarchy in Taiwan. It's like the doctor is the boss, the nurse never goes against the doctor, and this poor nurse, has to keep going back to the doctor and asking permission when she keeps getting a no. And then I think maybe the doctor finally was just like, whatever. So they told me if I could walk over to the nursery, I could hold him. Well, I just had a C-section, like, whatever. I think that. And so my friend Anna was like, well, what if we wheel her bed down to the nursery? Can she hold him for 30 minutes or whatever? And finally they relented and let us do that. So they wheeled me down there, and I got to meet Ben, and that was really special. And anyway,
I remember seeing, like, there was a post on Facebook, something. I realized the gravity of the situation, but I felt like what you shared in the post did not express that gravity. But having had HELLP syndrome with Haley, however many years ahead of you having it, and I had it in America. You're across the world. I just remember like reading this post, and I think turning to Brent and saying, like, did you see this? Like, we need to pray now. This is so serious. Yeah, I remember like thinking at some point, and maybe it was like a day or two later, a follow-up post or something, and I was like, gosh, Rachel is just being so chill about all of this.
Yeah, like I said, it's a blessing and a curse because I'm still that way to this day. I didn't even, I mean, even I think it was like a month later, I was talking to my good friend on the phone who is a labor and delivery nurse, and it was like she was like, "Rachel, you almost died." Like that, I
Yeah.
think it hit me like, okay, this was a really big deal because again, I mean, I was ill for 24 hours or 40. It's not like
Like
I
so
had,
long.
yeah, well, right, sure, but in my mind it was like I didn't feel like I had been that sick for that long, so I just didn't think it was that big of a deal. But I mean, yeah, praise God. I mean, there's just so many people, like my nurse friend who told me I should go to the hospital, that OBGYN that I knew that told me I needed to go right now. I think there were just a lot of people that, yeah, that helped me in that regard. And yeah, and I think what's interesting too about the post birth, because I think every foreign country has a different level of healthcare, and Taiwan is a first world country, and they have very good healthcare. I mean, it's not fancy like it is here in America, which is fine because I think that's part of what makes it a lot cheaper. But what's cool then is like with the recovery, I was in one of the biggest hospitals in the Taipei area. And so every kind of doctor you could imagine was in the building already. Where I'm like, had this happened in Williston, North Dakota, where I live now, I would have had to be flown out to some other hospital. And it was like, I had a liver specialist in there the next morning. I had all these doctors that were able to help. And yeah, and I don't know with your birth story, but I think, I mean, I drained so much fluid. I mean, I'm sure my feet, each of them had 20 ounces of fluid or something. But I mean, I think I lost like 30 pounds during the birth or something, like something crazy like that. I was retaining so much fluid. And I mean, the thing about HELLP syndrome, from what I understand, is it's caused by pregnancy. And I was no longer pregnant, and my body began to heal itself. And we were in the hospital for 3 days, I think, and we got to go home on Thanksgiving morning, and that was just such a blessing to get to take our son home and leave that hospital. And I think that's something I've always carried with me, with him, that we very well could have both died in that situation, but God, by his grace and mercy, we got to leave the hospital and continue to live our lives. So
Yeah, I remember the nurse coming into my room before I was wheeled back to surgery, and she was pushing on my legs and said, "How long has your edema been this bad?" And I
mm.
said, "What's edema?"
Exactly, right? Yeah.
So she was like, "Okay, like we don't need to talk back and forth anymore. You don't know how bad this is." But yeah, like
Yep.
you, I think it was a week later, I went through my favorite coffee place. Someone had to take me because I was still on medication, but I went through my favorite coffee place, and they were like, "You must have had the baby. You dropped so much weight." And it,
Yeah.
it wasn't even that I gained so much
Yeah.
weight. It was that I
It's
was
just water.
retaining every drop of
Yep.
fluid. I mean, it
Yep.
was not going through my system at all. So, yeah, so I
Yeah.
relate so much to what you went through, but also like, praise God,
mm.
things were in place at the right time in the right ways, and that you're both here today. And then we have Caleb and Penny in addition. So
Yeah.
what was it like parenting and raising a family in Taiwan as opposed to the US?
Oh man, if I'm being honest, it was 100 times easier to do it over there than it is over here. And I mean, everybody that knows me says I'm the most laid back mom they know. And I think a big part of that is just the island life is so laid back. Like we didn't own a car. I mean, we wouldn't have had anywhere to park it, but we both had these little moto scooters that we rode everywhere. And everybody buys one of those baby carriers, and you just carry your baby on there while you drive your moto. Like that's very commonplace. I mean, I've seen a family of 5 on one moto scooter. Um, it's very relaxed over there. And I think, it's interesting because so Travis and I now moved back to North Dakota in 2020. So we've been back for 4 years now. And so I've had both of raising a child 7,000 miles away from my family. And now my mom lives 5 minutes away. Travis's parents live 45 minutes away. And, there's pros and cons to both. I think with our our second son Caleb was 3 months old when we moved back, but I think with Ben, like I just had control sounds like a bad word, but I just, as far as his diet, what he watched, what he did, I had full control of that. I don't think Ben had sugar till he was 2 years old, and not that sugar's this terrible thing, but it was just like, well, why would we give him sugar? He doesn't need it. He doesn't know what he's missing. We didn't have junk. We just, he had a couple toys. We went and played outside every day. I mean, and again, we're living on a tropical island, which was very nice, where you can go outside probably 350 days a year if it's not raining. And so I think in that way, our life was very, very relaxed. And then we moved back to the States, where now we have a ton of help. I have a sister that lives in town. She helps me a lot. And that is great in its own way. I don't think we've ever paid for a babysitter, but it's also like we are parenting alongside people with different opinions, different visions, different diets, and it's not just people. I think culturally, like, I mean, in America, the food we eat is just, and I say we, myself included, is just terrible. I mean, and the way we eat, the amount of sugar, the process, it's just unbelievable here. And it's a constant battle, I think, to teach our kids how to eat healthy, real food. And that was not a challenge at all over there. Ben, every day for lunch, would have a giant roasted sweet potato on our walk home from the park. Like, that was, what he had for lunch. And we have a joke about him. I think it's from the movie Crazy Rich Asians, where she like calls somebody an egg, that they're white on the outside but yellow on the inside, and like that's definitely our son Ben. He's an egg, like, he's this blonde white boy, but I mean, his diet, he loves Asian food. I mean, he eats dumplings for lunch every day. He will eat like string. He loves sushi. He's 6 years old, and he just has this aversion to melted cheese, which is so funny because I feel like the American diet is built on melted cheese. Yeah, it's been funny with him. We have a much easier time getting him to eat whatever. And I think my middle son is way more like, I love snacks, I love sugar, I love, pizza, all these things. And so I don't know. I think it's hard to say because it's so easy. We've been back 4 years to idealize everything over there. Like, man, life was so much simpler. And in some ways it was, but in other ways it was really hard too. I mean, there's just some comfort in having family nearby. And yeah, so I think there's pros and cons to both. But yeah, I think America as a culture can be so uptight about child rearing, whether it be car seats or, like all of these things, which again aren't bad. And I could probably afford to be like more passionate about them. But I don't know. I just go back to like driving around on my moto with my 3 month old strapped to my front. And, and when he was older, he would stand in front of me and hold on to my rear view mirrors. And so yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment to America's just such an excessive culture. Like, everything is big. The portions are big, the holidays are big. That was a huge adjustment. Like, and I think it was good for me to leave the country for 5 years because you get used to it. But I'm just like, all of these holidays are built on mountains of candy. Like, it's just unbelievable. Like,
Yeah.
Halloween, which bleeds into Christmas, which bleeds into Valentine's Day, which bleeds into Easter. I mean, it's just candy. And then by the time you're done with Easter, it's parade season, and it's just a constant flow of candy and sugar and stuff. And so I think that has just, Travis and I, been a huge battle for us, trying to push back and live a simple life with our kids.
Yeah.
And when we don't feel like we're winning, but we're doing our best, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And I find it fascinating that you guys were in Taiwan for 5 years, born and raised. You in Minnesota, him in North Dakota. You're in Taiwan for 5 years. And when you come back to the US, that's where the big adjustment happens.
Right.
That's
Yep.
fascinating to me.
It totally is. Like, yeah, and I think too, I know some of the gals you've interviewed have been from Minnesota, and I think a lot of Midwesterners can relate to this. Like, I mean, I grew up on hot dish and canned vegetables, and I mean, there was No, I mean, like the most exotic thing we ate was tacos. Like that was Mexican food. And I mean, we just didn't eat any food like that. And so, that was a huge adjustment for me to move to Taiwan, where the food is just about as radically different as you can imagine. And especially we were missionaries, and so you feel that added weight of like we just want to honor the culture, we don't want to offend anyone. But this is kind of funny because after Ben was born, like he would eat anything, literally anything we put in his mouth. And so if we'd get invited to like a church event and they had like these little lunch boxes made up, if there's anything in there that Travis and I just were like not excited about eating, we just feed it to him. And I mean, he ate fish, and I'm pretty sure he had fish eyeballs at one point, like all sorts of crazy dishes. And so yeah, it was a huge culture shock moving over there, but I think we both just feel like such different people for having lived in a different culture, and stepped out of our culture for a little bit, and it makes us appreciate things about America that we hadn't appreciated before.
Mm.
And then I think, it also just opened our eyes to see things like we had a Taiwanese friend that came to visit America while we were here. And she went to Walmart, and her mind was blown by the cereal aisle. Like she just couldn't even wrap her mind around having literally 100 different kinds of cereal to choose from. And to us, it's like, that's just we're used to it. But when you really step back, you're like, wow, like, why do we have 100 kinds of breakfast cereal to choose from? That's crazy.
You came back to the States. You get set up and established in back in North Dakota. You're enduring winter again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but then you get pregnant again.
Yes.
So what
So,
was the contrast? And not only pregnant again in the US instead of Taiwan, but pregnant with a girl.
yeah, okay, so yes. So we actually we had our third baby was a miscarriage. We got pregnant in, let's see, December of 2021. And then we lost that baby, I think at like 10 weeks.
Hmm.
And then that's another story in and of itself. That was, I mean, a deep grief for us. And then we actually got pregnant with our daughter basically the weekend that baby was due. We conceived our daughter
Oh
Penny. So I
wow.
think I've heard a lot of people talk about rainbow babies like that, in the sense of it's devastating to lose this baby that we won't know until heaven. But also, like, Penny wouldn't exist if it were for this baby. And so there
Hmm.
is kind of a silver lining too, in that we get to have our daughter Penny. Yeah, so now we're pregnant in America, which, and again, for us, so Ben, it's unbelievable. We didn't have insurance, and I mean, everything that could have gone wrong with Ben went wrong. Emergency C-section, transfusions, ICU, all sorts of stuff. And still, I want to say it cost us $3,000 out of pocket, which we had, before anything went wrong, we had set aside $2,000 for the birth. And there's a super cool story about how God brought that last like $1,200 to get us out of the hospital and paid up, but just the generosity of a lot of people at the right time. So I think we were grateful because Travis's first job here, the insurance was just not good. I mean, it's like one of those things with a massive deductible. And then he got hired on with the city. He works for Public Works, and they have just amazing benefits. So we were grateful that we were able to have Penny with his insurance and not, cost us $5,000 or, well, and what's cool too, I didn't share this, but I wanted to try have a vaginal birth or a VBAC with my second son, just because I at least wanted to try, because I didn't want to
Yeah.
have, a C-section every time if I wasn't able to. And that's a whole other story I won't get into. But my doctor she had actually come to Mayo Clinic the year between my two sons were born for some sort of fellowship or whatever. And she had moved back, and she was like totally game to let me try. Whereas I don't think there was another doctor in that hospital that would have felt comfortable letting me try. Anyway, on they're really afraid to let people go overdo there, and especially with my situation. And so his pregnancy went much better. I had high blood pressure, but they're higher blood pressure, I guess, but it wasn't anything emergent. And they just said, like, well, if he's not here on his due date, then we're going to induce you at 9 a.m. And if the baby doesn't move, or, if it doesn't work out, we're going to have to do a C-section. And I was just kind of like, okay, Lord, whatever you have, having a healthy baby is the priority. And so we just had people praying that, he would come naturally. And it's just crazy. I went into labor the night before his due date, and he was born, I think, at 9:04 a.m., literally during the appointment that they were going to induce me in. And his birth went great. So I got to experience a natural birth over there too, which was crazy in its own right. They literally get on top of you and push the baby out.
What?
One of the nurses, yep. One of the nurses was like this, I don't know, I swear she was like bred for this. She was just Amazon woman, like literally like straddling me, pushing down on the baby to get it to drop. So I got to have that experience too.
What?
But he came, and I don't know, he just came right on time. So
how? Okay. What? How are you in labor, like active labor, not comfortable?
Right.
And like not in your own environment, and then you have someone climbing on top of you and pushing?
I was aware that it was a possibility that could happen, and so it didn't shock me, but I also had an epidural, so I wasn't experiencing like a ton of pain for contractions, but that I definitely felt like her pushing down, and I had a little bit of bruising. But I think for me, I was just like, I hadn't delivered naturally before, so I was like, I don't know how long this is going to take. So if this makes it go faster, like, it's fine by me.
Oh my word.
And then it was funny because like we're getting, I don't know, towards the end, and she was just like, okay, we have a choice. Like, you can either just continue to push, like if you do 2 or 3 really good pushes, or we can like suction the baby out or use this whatever little vacuum. And I was just tired, so I was like, oh, that's fine. And then she was like, okay, well, that'll cost $60 US. Which is funny because it's just like not that much money, but in my mind I'm like, no, I'm gonna do this myself. So then I did my last 3 pushes, and he came out just fine. But so yeah,
wow.
I don't know. So yeah, that lady definitely helped get the baby out, but it was it's different. This is a different experience. So
oh my word.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think giving birth in America, I mean, obviously like the huge pro here is the communication. Anytime I have a problem, I could just call the nurse and she can ask the doctor, and I can have an answer in 30 minutes, whatever. And I think that was a huge plus. And the birth, I mean, with Penny's birth wasn't easy either. My blood pressure was so high, I thought their machine was broken. I can't remember the number, but it was just like ridiculous. So they ended up having to give me, man, I can't remember, potassium or something like that.
Oof.
Yeah, that was not fun. That was not fun. But yeah, she came. Yeah. So she came out just fine. Travis got to, or he like watched that birth. He said that was like the coolest experience. And I should say too, we decided not to find out her gender because we'd found out with the boys, but we wanted to keep this one a surprise. But it's funny because I knew it was a girl because I was so ill with her. Like, I could not get out of bed. I mean, I just had a horrible morning sickness, constant nausea. And I always tell people, I'm like, in Taiwan, I lived right down the street from a fish market. I mean, all the like worst smells. Like everywhere you walk in Taiwan, there's just meat hanging out, the things that would make you sick. And I was never really that sick with the boys. And then with her, I was just, I had a pretty strong feeling that it was going to be a girl, but we didn't find out. And so I think it was really special for Travis to, and as know, Travis has 2 brothers. So he only has brothers. I have 3 older sisters, so I only have girls. And Travis's dad, Dale, he has, I don't know, how many brothers are there? There's 4 brothers. I think they had another brother who passed away. Yeah, and they all had sons. I mean, there's very few women in this family, in this biological family. So I think Dale was pretty proud of his strong stock that we just kept all producing boys. So I think there was a point of pride there when she came out as a girl that at least my genetics had something to say.
Yeah. Well, same. When I got pregnant, every single Kleppen,
Yeah.
from Grandma Lena to Dale to
Yep.
my father-in-law, they all said like, "Well, you're having a
Yeah.
boy, right?
It's no
You know
question
you're
it's going to
having a
be a
boy.
boy. Yep.
Kleppens have boys."
Yep. Yep.
Then
So,
surprise. Yeah.
yeah.
That's fantastic. And so how do you I mean, with the high blood pressure for all three pregnancies, how do you feel about being pregnant again?
That's a great question.
And I
I
just
don't
want to
know.
clarify. I say being pregnant again, like
Yes.
in the future, because you're not
Yes.
today.
I'm
I
not,
just want
no,
to
I am not
clarify.
pregnant. Yes, I'm not pregnant this moment. It is definitely a question for me because I think we would like to continue to grow our family and we're praying about how to do that. I'm not old or anything. I just turned 35 this year. There's, certainly still time. But yeah, it's definitely a question we're asking because I so admire people who love being pregnant and just felt like it's the best they've felt in their life. That's never been my experience. Like I just feel constantly tired, body sore, and I feel that I've been very blessed to have delivered three healthy children with the high blood pressure thing. And so I think that is something we're praying about, wanting to just decide, sooner rather than later if we want to continue to grow our family. But it is a concern of mine too. And yeah, just the older you get, the heavier you get too. I feel like I've just grown with each baby. Um, and so
Yeah, some of that
I,
fluid retention just never
yeah,
goes
I
away,
know.
right?
I was really hoping more of it would drain out, but the solid stuff doesn't drain as well as the liquid. Um, so yeah, I think, yeah, it is just something we're praying about, but also just feeling, I don't know, grateful for modern healthcare too, because I think about Ben's birth. It's so sad to think about 100 years ago. Ben and I probably both would have died, and what was one of the happiest days of Travis's life would have been one of the worst days of his life, and
Mm,
so I'm so grateful that there is, and that doesn't mean that everything ends with a healthy baby, and like there's danger in every pregnancy, and yeah, so I think I yeah, the door isn't closed, but we're still just kind of praying and deciding what,
yeah,
yeah, just seeking what God has
yeah.
for our family, and so
So, what are some things that you guys like to do with your kids to have fun and make memories in these early years?
man, our boys are just like so fun. Like I've learned a lot about boys. I mean, like I said, I have three sisters. I grew up with a single mom. I had never lived with a boy until I married Travis. And boys, I mean, just like my boys, their love language is being chased. Like I mean, they could be like all out bawling in the middle of the floor, and if you like make a move towards chasing them, it's just like all bets are off and just pure joy and glee. And so they love playing hide and seek with us. They still think we're cool, which is special. We like to watch movies together. They're at a fun age where they're starting to learn like board games that aren't annoying, that are just like,
Yeah.
I'm so ready to be done with Candyland forever. But yeah, so they're just, I don't know. I was realizing like last week after dinner, my son asked me to play a card game with him, and so we were playing cards and we popped some popcorn, and it's just one of those moments of like, I think what's so hard about parenting is it's just like it's so hard to track how you're doing, or like what
Mm,
are my goals, how am I achieving, it's just like, are we on the right path, and most of the time you don't know, but sometimes you get moments like this of like, my kid wants to sit and play cards and eat popcorn with me. Like they like to do puzzles. They like to read books. They're not like kids who just sit in front of the TV all the time, and like yeah. And so I think it's fun to see them develop in that way. And yeah, and I mean, they're also having two brothers that are close in age. I mean, it can be like WWF here in the house a lot too. Like
Yeah.
boys just resolve things sometimes with violence. And so that's it's been not only an adjustment for me, but like my mother-in-law Brenda, who you know, is not phased by my kids at all. Like there's
Right.
nothing that phases her because she had three sons, like, you know, and they have crazy stories about the things that they did to each other growing up. But my mom, you know, who loves these boys with her whole heart, like is so overwhelmed of like they're wrestling on my floor and I don't know what to do, you know. And so it's just it's funny, like parenting them in private, but also parenting them in public when they just
Yeah.
throw a punch or, you know, whatever. And
Has Travis taught Ben at least how to play pinochle yet?
no, okay, I'm glad you brought this up because okay, so your family I plays pinochle. So I've heard I've only played pinochle with you and Brent, and then maybe one time, like when Travis and I were dating. But Travis made an interesting observation when he was in Taiwan in, I think he was there for like 2012 and 2013. And those 2 years is when smartphones just like blew up. And that's when everybody got one. And he remembers before he left, like very few people had a smartphone. And then when he got back, everyone had one. And
Hmm.
he was just like, that first family Christmas he was back, he's like, I just couldn't believe that everybody was on their phones the whole time. Like, and they weren't playing cards, like all these things that they'd done growing up. And anyway, I think, yeah, this past weekend we were at his parents' house, and he has second cousin, something like that, Caitlin. She's 11 or she's 13 now, and I asked her to play a card game with me, and we had a great time. We were playing this card game a friend had given to me, and I told Caitlin that story. I said, you know, Travis told me that this family used to play cards all the time, and now that everyone has phones, they don't play anymore. And I said, we're gonna change this. We're gonna work on this. And so that's my hope, is to start bringing cards. And I'm not saying his family is like totally boring and all they do is stare at
Right.
their phones, but I do think those things tend to go out the window in like, oh, we have nothing else to do, let's pull out a deck of cards, and then you end up playing pinochle for 3 hours. I think you lose those moments.
Oh, that is a little mind-boggling to me because I felt like I could not officially become a Kleppen. Like I may have been a Kleppen in name, but not in spirit unless or until I learned how to play pinochle.
Yeah.
And were it not for your mother-in-law sitting next to me and
Yes.
showing me how to play and being like, I would play this one right now. Now I would play this one. Like I probably wouldn't have. Brent is a great teacher, but it's
Yeah.
different when it's your wife, you
Oh
know?
my gosh,
So
actually that reminds me, I had a story about Brent, because I mean, we've only hung out with you guys like twice because we were
probably, yeah.
overseas. And
Yeah.
anyway, this is funny, and this will probably make you laugh because I know Brent's not really like this, but when we were we stayed with you guys for a night, we ended up playing pinochle, and he was on some ridiculous diet where he was like not eating for 3 days at a time or something like that. I don't remember. But I do remember, and that he hadn't eaten for several days or something, and he was not in the greatest of moods. Like, who would be if you hadn't eaten for 3 days?
Sure.
And
Right.
I think as we were playing pinochle, like I can't remember who was partner. I think you were partners with him, and I think we were just like casually playing a game and visiting. And I think maybe you had a suboptimal play or something like that, and he was pretty frustrated. But again, all because of the lack of eating. But
Yeah.
it is so
Wink,
funny the
wink.
things we do to our
Yeah.
bodies.
Yeah.
But
That is funny. So many pinochle memories. Well, I
yes.
hope that, I mean, Travis was probably about Ben's age when he started to learn how to play
Yeah.
pinochle, I would guess.
Yes. No, I'm really, I my boys are starting to learn. Like Ben is just the most uber competitive, like stubborn, strong-willed, like very strong Kleppen blood flowing through his veins. And anytime he sees a game that says this game is for 8 plus or 7 plus, it's like, I don't care that I'm 6, like I am going to learn this game. And so there's a new card game. It's called Sky Joe. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's kind of like the card game Golf. But my friend had sent me, and he learned how to play that, and he just absolutely loves playing cards. He loves playing games that he feels like he's not old enough for, but his mind can figure out. So he probably is in the range of learning Pinochle.
Oh,
But
that's fantastic, and I hope he does, and I
yes,
hope that all Kleppens, your kids, my kids, carry on the pinochle tradition. I have to say, I'm
absolutely.
excited to have spent so much time on this podcast talking about pinochle. That
Yes, I need
that's
a refresher of the rules because I have not played Pinochle in years. My husband, uh, we have a friend in Taiwan who was obsessed with board games. Like in my mind, I thought like Monopoly and Settlers of Catan were the only board games. Wow, I could not have been more wrong. There is like a whole world of board games. Travis has a shelf with probably, I don't know, 150 board games. So he has kind of moved into the board game life, so he doesn't play cards as much. But I like cards
mm,
because I think cards are much more social games, and they're just,
yeah,
I don't know, designed around connecting with other people, and it's easy to pull out a deck of cards. So
yeah.
anyway.
Well, I know that you have to get going soon. I am so glad that we were able to connect and hear about all three of your children, your stories from Taiwan. How do I want to wrap this up? I would say, what would you want people to know and pray for, maybe, about being a parent in a missionary field, and maybe for Taiwan specifically?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to answer that question, and then I did have one story I wanted to share about how we named our daughter Penny before we
Oh
go.
yeah,
It's
I,
just
I
this.
wanted to ask you about that actually, because I know that
Yeah.
there's some real significance there.
Yes, but I will answer your question first. I just this morning I was praying. I was like, I want to share that story. Man, that is a great question. I think, for praying for people overseas, like I think it can be really isolating sometimes. Especially, yeah, I mean, there's different phases. I mean, I think I knew missionaries who had been in Taiwan for 15 or 20 years who like felt way more uncomfortable in America than they did there. Like they had really transitioned, I guess, to the culture over there. And then other people who, yeah, like myself, I was still in massive culture shock and in a country that I felt called to love but didn't naturally love, if that makes sense, and bringing a child into that culture. um and so I think just it's always good to just pray for missionaries to just bloom in the country that they're planted, because it's hard. It's like 1,000 times harder now because of FaceTime and all of it and streaming and social media. It's like the best possible thing you can do to transition into a culture is just fully immerse yourself in that culture. And I think that's so
Mm,
much harder to do now because you can really immerse yourself in your own culture through your phone or your TV or. And so that's just something I always encourage people to pray just for people's transition process. And yeah, I mean, we get asked about Taiwan a lot. It's in the news, a lot that China is, on the verge of taking them over. I mean, that's been the case ever since I've, been in Taiwan. I think I hate to say it's inevitable because I hope they don't. Taiwan is a wonderful country. It's a democracy. There's freedom of religion. They have all sorts of freedoms that China does not, and that China would love to pull them under their wing. And yeah, I think just that people would just continue to be steadfast, and really that the Taiwanese church would continue to grow, because I think that's one thing China has done in, when they're I don't know, being excessively communist, I guess you could say, is they kick foreigners out of the country. And I mean, and they close, you know, I don't know, opportunities for the world to know what's going on. And I think that's something that they do. And so I think if they do take over Taiwan, that a lot of foreigners are going to have to leave. And
mm,
that leaves the Taiwanese church. And so we just pray that they would continue to grow and have the strength to see their country come to the Lord. It's a small church. I think Taiwan is like 4% Christian or something like that, but also just a really passionate 4% too. So,
mm.
yeah, that's
Wow.
kind of my
Thank you for that.
answer.
And yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about Penny's name.
Yeah. Okay. So our I forget, were you at our wedding? I think you might have been sick. I know Brent came.
Heston was 6, so Brent and
Okay.
Haley were there. Yeah.
Okay. So it was really cool. We had a friend, a Taiwanese friend, who happened to be in the States that summer. They do like a lot of tourism exchanges. And so she was working at Wisconsin Dells, which is funny because she is like so brilliant and fluent in English and whatever. And she's like working at Wisconsin Dells. So the next time you go to an amusement park and you see like a foreign worker, realize like this is a really smart person who filled out like a mountain of paperwork to be able to spend the summer in America. And so anyway, she was able to come to our wedding, and it was so special because she read our wedding passage in Mandarin, and it was just a really cool way. We were, you know, about to move to Taiwan permanently, and to kind of, I don't know, fuse our American life and Taiwanese life together at our wedding was really cool. So I just want to tell you a little bit about her. So her Taiwanese name was Pei Jun, but her American name was Penny. And she became a Christian in 2016 or like late 2015. So right around the time I met her, she's first generation Christian. Had never had a family member in her whole history generation that was a Christian, and she came to faith at this little coffee bar that our YWAM base had. It was like an English, you could practice English there, and she came to a Bible study and just had just a really real and radical transformation. So she was a university student at the time, and her university was just up the road from our house, and we just became fast friends with her, and spent a lot of time with her. She was, I mean, an aunt to our kids because our family was so far away. And when she was graduating from college, she was really trying to decide what it was she was feeling called to do, whether she wanted to join YWAM and be a missionary in another country. She talked about being a flight attendant. She had, I mean, so many opportunities, things that she could do. And I remember she called me one day and she said, Rachel, I know what God is calling me to do. And I was like, well, that's great. She's like, I am going to move home and I'm going to move in with my family and I'm going to take my niece and nephew to church. And I'm just thinking like, this is a terrible idea. Like I have non-believing family members, and I trying to be an evangelist to them is like one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And this is what she's stepping into. And she's just from a place that there's so many temples around there. It's just a really dark spiritual place. And I kind of discouraged her from doing that. And she was like, no, I just, this is what God is calling me to do. I need to make sure my niece and nephew know God. And so in Taiwan, like a lot of families live like intergenerationally. So like her dad owned an auto body shop, and then they lived above the auto body shop. It was her parents, and then her brother and his wife and their 2 kids. And then she moved in with them, and then her brother had another baby, and then her other brother had a baby with his fiance, and he was in the military, so he didn't live in the home, but she moved in. So I mean, just like lots of people living in this small apartment. And so she moved back there in 2019, I think. And that's what she did. She taught at an after school English program, like, I mean, and yeah, brought her niece and nephew to church with her, Sunday school. All of those kids went to church with her every Sunday. On, let's see, this would have been 2022, June 15th, 2022 is my birthday. And I was back in the States at that time. And I was out for dinner with friends, and I came home and I just had a ton of missed calls on my phone. And they were from all my friends in Taiwan. And I'm thinking, like, oh, they're wishing me a happy birthday and whatever. I'll message them the next day. And then right before I plugged my phone in, I had this article sent to me that just said, Rachel, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but this is Penny. And I opened this article, and there's a huge picture of a fire. Their auto shop had burnt down, and Penny and her mom and both her sisters-in-law and all 4 kids were upstairs, and they were all killed in that fire. And I mean, I was so crushed and devastated at her loss. I mean, I never lost anyone that close to me, and also someone who was so young and full of life. And in the days after, it's devastating because I mean, 4 kids were killed, and I just thought back to that conversation I had with her about how she just knew that's what God was calling her to do, was the simple task of moving home and bringing her niece and nephew to church. And I just got this picture in my mind of the night that she died. It was like she stepped into glory and had all those little kids trailing right behind her. And her life is so inspiring to me, because I think what she helped me to understand was, I think when we think about obedience to God and what that looks like, it looks like doing something big and splashy and scary. And I think what she did was she listened to God and was obedient in doing something really mundane, if that makes sense. Like, she had a lot of great opportunities. She chose the thing God called her to do. And those kids are in heaven with her because of her obedience. And, as far as her other family members, like, she shared the gospel with them constantly. And I don't know what they decided, but I know that they had a decision to make. They heard the gospel and they knew the gospel. And so when we found out we were pregnant with who is now our daughter Penny, I told Travis, I was like, if this is a girl, like, I just feel like we need to name her Penny. And not because, like, I think this is something I'm always careful with, like, when you choose a name for your child, like, we don't believe that our daughter is like a reincarnation of like this specific Penny person, but like, we chose that name because of her story is so powerful to us and her legacy. And that's just a prayer that we have for our daughter Penny, is that she would be obedient to what God calls her to, whether that's something drastic and wild or whether it's choosing the simple mundane thing. And I think what's really special too is my friend Penny just was one of the most joyous people I've ever met in my life. Just so, so, so full of joy. And so is my daughter. Like, Penny is just loves to be happy. Like, and if she's not, she wants to be. And so it's special to see that quality of joy that got passed on to our daughter. And it's just a reminder of our friend who we loved so much. And anyway, I just wanted to share that story because I feel like it is so powerful. And I just love my friend Penny, and any chance I get to share about her life and her legacy is just really special too. So
Absolutely. And just knowing that we can have a legacy of that type where we impact the hearts and lives of someone else, where they might name their kid after us. What a cool story. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your journey of motherhood. This has been a blast.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.